Hey everybody, welcome back. Thanks for tuning into another episode of Field Facts with Forrest. I'm your host, Forrest Carpenter, and today we are going to talk about early season duck hunting. Now, when I'm talking early season, I'm not talking about you guys down in the South, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, where you guys start up around Thanksgiving or so. I'm talking about for the folks up north, going to Canada, early season duck hunting, September, October, that kind of stuff. So we're talking about that before the migration really gets going, early season type duck hunting. We're going to talk about where to find ducks. We're going to talk about spreads, how to create motion, and we're going to touch on calling a little bit today too. So hopefully you can get something good out of this one. Today, let's start with scouting. All right, when we're talking about hunting early season ducks, typically there's not a whole lot of grain cut early. You might have those wheat fields, you might have some silage cut corn fields, but there's not going to be a whole lot of grain. And even where there is, there's very few ducks that are going to be going there. It's typically only your mallards that are going to be going to those grain fields, maybe some pintails, especially up in Canada, you're going to have some pintails. But aside from mallards and pintails, most of the ducks are going to be on water. So with those early season species being typically teal, widgeon, gadwall, you've got some early pintails, a little bit of everything, but a lot of those smaller puddle ducks, they live on the water all the time. And they will, while they will frequent fields occasionally, typically you're going to have your most success finding them on small bodies of water, even bigger bodies of water, big lakes, anything that hasn't frozen up. And being September and October, there's a lot of water, so you're going to find smaller concentrations of birds, typically real spread out. So as we get going there, we are going to talk about dry field duck hunting just at a later date. While that's a great option early, especially if you can find your mallards in the fields, we're going to talk about that episode here in a couple weeks. And we're going to go over some dry field duck hunting here shortly. But today we're just going to focus on the early small bodies of water, especially kind of duck hunting. So the spreads, typically, like I said, because there's a lot of open water, the birds aren't going to be as concentrated. You might have a couple places that have a few hundred ducks on it, hopefully. I mean, that's always a great setup for a hunt. But typically, it's going to be smaller numbers. You know, a couple, 50, 75 ducks is a pretty decent little spot for early in the year. So we're going to throw out smaller spreads. 2 to 4 dozen floaters, just your typical early season or straightforward just duck hunting spread. A couple dozen decoys. If you've got some nice shoreline or some shallower water, I love throwing in some of the M1 mallard silhouettes, or even using the S3 mallard socks. They look great too over shallow water. So kind of keeping that in mind, it's nice to be able to go small. And very similarly to what I've talked about when it comes to goose hunting, I like to do small groups kind of spread out. So when I'm looking at ducks on the pond, typically there might be a couple groups of 5 or 10, 15 ducks kind of clustered up early in the season, but for the most part they're little family groups, just like the geese. They kind of spread out and do their own thing. So set a pair here, set 3 over there, 5 here, just little clusters of ducks kind of all over, keeping in mind that more so than geese, the ducks are going to center up and land in a kill hole. So you can leave a nice open spot right in front of you where you want those ducks to finish, or if you're using kind of a J-shaped spread, kind of leave it nice and open in that pocket there and let those ducks work in, and typically they'll center up pretty nicely for you. Another way to center them up, we'll talk about here in a few minutes, but with motion decoys. So as we've got these loose spreads, think about them like they're doing their own thing. They're all spread out. They're all kind of hunting for food. A lot of bugs this time of year. They're eating a lot of invertebrates down there on the water, especially these other species of ducks like widgeon, gadwall, teal, that sort of deal. They've got a nice mixed diet. So they'll be moving around, all spread out, not paying as much attention to where each other are, but more so just where the next bite of food is. So, if you think about yourself walking through a parking lot with your head down looking for quarters, that's kind of how it goes. You start with 20 people in the same spot, pretty soon it's going to get really loose and really, cover some ground. So think about doing something like that with your duck decoys. And while we're on the topic of duck decoys, if you haven't seen them yet or haven't gotten to check them out, I want to talk a little bit about these awesome F1 floaters that we've got. These are still a couple of the prototypes that I have, but man, they are awesome. They're just flat out duck. We didn't try to do anything different or anything wild with it. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. These are just flat out duck decoys. With the Drake here, you notice just the darker head. We're not going super vibrant. We do have a pretty bright speculum on it, but again, it's just realistic. We're not doing anything crazy. We're just trying to make these things look as much like ducks as we can. On these hens, man, I really love the color. This lighter neck patch here and lighter right here around the cheek goes a long way with just a little bit of vibrance here, but I think the color of the hen is awesome. And the best thing about these decoys is when you get them in any sort of current or wind whatsoever, the movement is uncanny. You know, Cody won't even tell me what they did to get it sorted out, but man, the way that they have put movement into these decoys is just wild, and especially early in the season, you know, where you get some hot, stale days. On a little bit of light wind goes a long way, or even a jerk string can get these things moving pretty well. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you haven't gotten a chance to check them out, go over to our website, divebombindustries.com, and take a look at those F1 floaters because they are awesome. And not to mention, there's nowhere on the market where you're going to find these things at this good of a price point. For a dozen, we're selling them for $125, but if you go ahead and buy 5 dozen, that drops them down to $100 a dozen. So even if they're not all for you, maybe you and your buddy are trying to buy a few decoys, man, look into those F1s and go together, buy 5 dozen of them, and you know, you can fit 2.5 dozen in most bags. So you each get yourself a bag of decoys, get a nice discount on the decoys, and then you're pretty well set. So take a look at those things. Now moving on into the motion, I talked about centering the ducks up as they finish with motion. A lot of guys, myself included, especially early in the year, have a lot of success by using robo ducks right where we want the ducks to finish. Now, robos are kind of like decoys for greater Canadas. The ducks don't typically like to fly over them and past them, so I like to think about using my robo ducks as kind of a blocker. I like to think of the ducks finishing just behind them and using the robos as kind of a wall to stop them. Or even, you know, in the case of teal, gosh, if you get the big wads of teal coming in at Mach 3, you don't want them coming right there to your face, because then you can't hit the darn things. It's cool, but man, it makes it hard to hit. So I like to put those robos out there 10-15 yards from me at least, so those ducks kind of stop in a place where I can still move quickly enough to get a good shot on them. So those robos are great early, whether it's the battery operated ones or the pull string robos in the Pacific Flyway, or for anyone who can't use motorized decoys, those pull string robos are awesome too. And I've seen a lot of really great hunts over those, and it's nice because you get that finesse, and you really only have it running as long as you are manually doing it, so you don't ever have the robo running at a time you don't want them. Say if you've got an early duck and early goose season that overlap, and you don't want your robos spinning out there while you've got a few geese moving around, you know, it works out really nicely. I like having those pull string robos. Another thing, and probably my favorite motion tool to use, is a jerk string. Real simple. A jerk string is basically an anchor tied to a bungee, tied to decoy line that's got clips that you clip your decoys onto. So when you run that line all the way back to the blind, you pull on it, decoys come towards you, you let go, and that bungee pulls them right back towards that anchor. So you get some really nice movement. You can tie anywhere from, you know, a couple feeder butts all the way up to, you know, you can even build spacers, or they sell spacers to where you can put a dozen or 2 dozen decoys on these jerk strings and make unbelievable amounts of ripples. So again, in those early season calm wind days, especially on big lakes, man, I have shut public areas down by having 2 jerk strings going on a big lake, to where other guys weren't even firing a shot until we had our limit. So don't be shy to use old techniques like the jerk string, or even throwing rocks. I mean, if you got a bag of rocks, I'm not saying you got birds coming at you and you're throwing a whole fistful out there. You know, wait until they're on the corners and slip one out the side of the blind. You know, if you've got your local John Elway or Joe Montana in the blind with your guy who thinks he is anyway, you know, give them a pile of rocks and have them sling them when those ducks are, you know, quartering away from you. And at any time that they don't have a good view, throw a couple rocks out there. Give yourself a little bit of extra motion, some ripples throughout the spread. You would be blown away with how effective ripples are, because it's something natural. It's something they see every time they approach live ducks. And when you're flying, especially, I mean, man, whether it's the winter and I want to see some ducks on the water to see how they're sitting, or whether I'm in Alaska looking for moose walking through lakes, the way you find objects in water is looking for motion. Where you find ripples, follow the ripples, you'll find what you're looking for. So that's just how the birds do it. Ripples go farther than anything. And whether it's a jerk string or something newer like a mallard machine or any of these, and there's some really awesome motion decoys out there now that splash and that make all sorts of ripples. So look into those, and they will definitely change the way that you hunt. When it comes to calling in the early season, again, this is where we have to be aware of the species that we're hunting. Are you in an area like, Canada, where you do have mallards and pintails around that, you can blow a typical duck call and make it sound like they're hens? Or are you hunting places like Colorado here, where most of what we have early is going to be widgeons and gadwalls and teal and maybe a few pintails here and there and the occasional mallard, but wood ducks, basically stuff that whistles, squeals, does everything other than makes a mallard sound. So keep that in mind. If you're sitting there blowing a mallard call at every wood duck that goes by, I can pretty much guarantee you're going to have poor results, because they just flat out don't care. They don't want to sit with mallards. They want to sit with their own kind. Now, if you pick up a wood duck call and learn how to make a pretty good squeal and a couple different notes of a wood duck, you can really turn those things around like you got them on a string. So call specifically for the species that you're calling for. And also keep in mind that, again, these birds aren't staging. They're not migrating. They're not thinking about breeding yet. They just got finished rearing their young, and a lot of times their young are still with them. So they're not super social right now. That's why we're not using real big spreads, or we're not hunting places that have 3,000 or 4,000 ducks in them typically this time of year. So keep that in mind, and when you're calling, don't be surprised if it doesn't work. Honestly, our season here, I've grown up usually hunting about middle to third week of September through the beginning of October. Man, that little 3 weeks period right there gets tough as a duck caller, because you don't have a lot of success. Even if you're really good on a call, ducks aren't wanting to be with one another there, so you're not breaking high flocks. You're not really cranking them around. And for that reason, I like to say call less. Less is more. You've heard me say it with the geese. And the more you reserve your calling, when you do say something, it holds more value. So instead of sitting here and blowing a meat routine or trying to sound like 300 ducks sitting on a pond, let the ducks come and check you out. Give them one hand, to get them to come and take a look at you. Once they've looked, let them kind of swing, wait until they're on the corner to hit them again. Once they're kind of locked up and interested, maybe some real light feed call, just single cluck stuff, just tuck, 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 real light stuff, just to kind of keep them interested. But don't be discouraged when you get a flock of mallards that goes by and you really, there's my mallards, I can call at them, and you call at them real aggressively and they don't do anything. That's just the time of year, and you're going to have mixed results. So your best key early season is going to be where they want to be, or be in an area they can see you. All right. I know I said we're going to talk about dry field hunting more a little bit later, but goose decoys can go a long way too. So even on smaller ponds or small bodies of water, I've had a lot of people ask me about this, and the black and white silhouettes are the way to go when it comes to duck hunting. My gosh, those black and white silhouettes pop. They don't flare the ducks at all. They see them from a long way away, and they come to check out and see what is over there. So I highly recommend, if you've got some shoreline available, mix in some of those black and white silhouettes. They really go a long way to help you out. That's about all I had for this episode of Field Facts with Forrest. Again, we want to scout. We want to find these birds. Like any time else, anything you're going to hunt, you want to put the time and work in to go make sure there's birds there when you go and try to do this. So you're checking out bodies of water anywhere. There's lots of them. Nothing's frozen. They're going to be really spread out. Go find them. Next thing, spreads. We're going smaller, we're going loose, kind of again like you put a bunch of people in a parking lot and send them searching for quarters. They're going to be spread out, kind of out there doing their own thing, looking for invertebrates, different areas of grass and food that they can pick on. And then when it comes to making it look real, motion is key. Get a jerk string rigged up. Maybe look into a mallard machine or robo ducks, maybe have a couple of them there just to make things look live, make it look like things are moving, because they are always constantly moving on the water. They're hardly ever sitting still. When they take a nap, maybe they're sitting still, but a lot of times they'll come up on the shoreline for that. So we want a lot of motion in the spread, make it look realistic. And when it comes to calling, don't get discouraged. Keep calling, keep trying to work them, use your calls sparingly, but don't be brokenhearted when they don't listen, because it's just not that time of year. Second week of October comes around, they're gonna start listening more, I promise. Later into the year you get, the more they tend to listen to it until they get paired up. So just stay with it. Don't beat yourself up over it. You're still a good duck caller. It'll work later. Just give it some time. So thanks again for watching this episode of Field Facts with Forrest. Again, please keep submitting those questions. Keep them coming. I get new questions every day. So just keep sending them to Forrest, Forrest, at divebombindustries.com, and go ahead, like and subscribe down below. Click on that bell so you get alerts every time we post to this page here. And hopefully this helped out. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.